Canada is abandoning its electric vehicle mandate, and Donald Trump's trade war is the reason. While the world watches Trump's tariffs wreak havoc across North America, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney just announced he's waiving the requirement that 20% of all vehicles sold next year be emissions-free. It's part of a massive $5 billion aid package designed to help Canadian companies survive the economic carnage from Trump's punitive trade measures. We're talking about a complete reversal of environmental policy, billions in emergency funding, and a nation scrambling to protect its economy from an unpredictable American president. The transformation we're witnessing represents a fundamental shift in how the world conducts trade, moving from an era of free trade to economic nationalism.
The world is changing rapidly. The largest economy, the United States, is fundamentally reshaping all of its trading relationships. And we're moving from an age that lasted decades, an age when free trade was a motor of global economic growth, to a new age, an age of economic nationalism and mercantilism. You know, the U.S. tariff rate is now the highest it has been since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And these tariffs are being applied to all countries on nearly all goods. And the changes in U.S. policy go beyond tariffs. Countries now must in effect buy access to the world's largest economy through investments, through unilateral trade liberalization, and policy changes in their home markets. And all the while, the transformation of global trade is occurring against a backdrop of wider economic disruptions, of geopolitical realignment, of AI and other technological transformations, and the necessity, the imperative of a shift to a greener economy. What's going on is not a transition, it's a rupture, and its effect will be profound. Workers displaced from their jobs.
U.S. tariff rates have now reached their highest levels since the Great Depression, affecting all countries and goods. This transformation is causing worker displacement, supply chain disruptions, and economic uncertainty that's holding back investment and slowing growth across the continent. To understand this dramatic shift, we need to look at how Trump's tariff obsession has created chaos across the Canadian economy. Since February 2025, Trump has imposed sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, claiming they were related to border security. Those were later scaled back to apply only to goods not covered by the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. But in the months since, the U.S. president has stacked significant additional sectoral tariffs on steel and aluminum, copper, and automobiles. The numbers are staggering. Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum started at 25%, but were doubled to 50% by June 2025. Canada, which supplies about 50% of U.S. aluminum imports and 20% of its steel imports, has been devastated. The automotive sector, which is highly integrated across North America, has seen supply chains disrupted and profit margins slashed. What makes this particularly brutal is the uncertainty. Trump has repeatedly shifted his tariff plans, threatening to raise Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%, then backing down, then implementing them anyway. Felix Tintelnot, a professor of economics at Duke University, explains that this flip-flopping is causing real harm to businesses. Companies can't make long-term investments when they don't know if the same trade policies will exist in 2, 3, or 4 years. Until recently, Canada had maintained that it has the best trade deal of any country in the world with the United States, with 85% of trade being tariff-free and the lowest average tariff globally. These are the strategic sectors including steel, aluminum, forest products, autos, pharmaceuticals, and copper that both sides of the border have benefited from for decades.
Okay, well, let's go to results. Right now, we have the best trade deal of any country in the world. Okay, those are results. We think it can be better, and we're working to make it better, but to be absolutely clear, 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. Nobody else is in that position. Our average tariff is about 5.5%. That's the lowest average tariff of any country in the world. So right now we have the best, but we have real issues. Without question, we have real issues. in steel, in aluminum, in forest products, in autos, potentially in pharma, copper, some other sectors. So there's these strategic sectors that the U.S. has focused on, where we have issues. And as well, there will be a review of CUSMA, our trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, starting next year. So we need to prepare for that. We need to lay the groundwork for that review, and we need to address as rapidly as possible these strategic sectors. Okay.
But Trump's aggressive tariff strategy has shattered this carefully constructed economic relationship. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association has been lobbying hard against the Liberal government's zero-emission vehicle mandate, arguing it would cripple their companies and put thousands of jobs at risk. They welcomed Carney's announcement, saying the push for mandates imposed unsustainable costs on companies and threatened investment. But here's where Trump's strategy completely backfired. Instead of forcing Canada to capitulate, his tariffs have pushed the country toward economic independence from the United States. Carney, who won an April election on the need to diversify the economy away from the U.S., is using Trump's trade aggression as justification for a complete restructuring of Canada's economic relationship with America. The scale of Canada's response is remarkable. The $5 billion Strategic Response Fund will help companies access new markets, retool, or expand. It replaces the Strategic Innovation Fund and includes $1 billion already announced for the steel industry. But that's just the beginning of Canada's comprehensive support for workers displaced by Trump's trade war.
These are the sectors where workers and businesses have been impacted by those tariffs and trade disruptions. And we're building on our recent initiatives to help transform Canada's steel and lumber sectors. The measures today will help workers acquire the skills and businesses to retool their production, businesses to diversify their products and markets, and crucially spurring more demand right here at home for Canadian businesses. The first and foremost, the foundation, is Canadian workers. And we're going to support Canadian workers so they can drive Canada's economic transformation with new skills training and help them seize the exciting high-paying careers that that transformation will create. To build a strong confidence workforce that will help propel our economy forward, the government is introducing a new robust reskilling package to train 50,000 workers. This package will include new methods such as employer-based training and targeted outreach to workers. We will automatically enroll new employment insurance claimants to our new jobs matching program and introduce a new platform with a skills to job tool to make job searches easier and match people more quickly to new jobs, connect them to training opportunities.
The Prime Minister has announced a massive reskilling package to train 50,000 workers, including automatic enrollment in job matching programs and new AI-powered platforms for job searches. Long tenure workers will receive up to 65 weeks of employment insurance benefits, 20 more weeks than current provisions, and the 1-week waiting period will be waived for over 700,000 claimants. Ottawa is also launching a comprehensive Buy Canadian policy for federal government procurement, essentially cutting American suppliers out of lucrative government contracts.
Is preparing to defend his global tariff regime before the Supreme Court.
Because without the tariffs, this country is in serious trouble.
Trump standing by his trade tactics comes as one cabinet minister asserted today that despite dropping retaliatory tariffs, Prime Minister Mark Carney hasn't put his elbows down.
There's no capitulation. Let's be clear. Zero. Never. That's not happening. We're trying to match exactly what the Americans have done.
This isn't just a suggestion or best efforts approach. It's now a clear obligation for all federal agencies and crown corporations. The government will require ministerial approval for any exceptions when Canadian suppliers are unavailable, committing to build with Canadian steel, lumber, technology, and workers, while cutting red tape to simplify access to federal procurement opportunities for Canadian businesses. Canada's public procurement is following outdated rules of a free trade order that no longer exists, Carney explained. For years, we have been buying significantly from foreign suppliers for short-term gain. Now we need to use government procurement using Canadian taxpayer dollars to spur Canadian businesses for longer-term prosperity. The government is also helping the Canadian canola, beef, and seafood industries, which have been hit hard by Chinese tariffs imposed in retaliation for Canada's support of U.S. trade policies. More than $370 million is going to biofuel production incentives to help these sectors restructure their value chains. But the most significant aspect of Carney's announcement isn't the money, it's the strategic pivot away from the United States. Canada is developing a trade diversification strategy aimed at increasing Canadian exports to overseas markets to 50% by 2030. That's a direct challenge to the integrated North American economy that has existed for decades. The employment insurance changes are equally telling. The government is extending benefits for workers who have spent significant time with one employer and waiving waiting periods to receive benefits. These aren't temporary measures, they're preparations for a long-term economic disruption caused by Trump's trade policies. What's particularly damaging for Trump is that Canada's retaliatory measures are specifically designed to hurt American workers and businesses. Canada imposed 25% retaliatory tariffs on $21.7 billion worth of U.S. goods, including steel, aluminum, computers, sports equipment, and other products. While Canada dropped many of these retaliatory tariffs in August 2025 as a goodwill gesture, they kept the 25% tariffs on U.S. autos, steel, and aluminum in place. The relationship between our two nations has reached a breaking point.
On a mission to build Canada strong through major infrastructure projects, through that modern defense industry, and by building millions of more homes. In that mission, the public sector can serve as an anchor customer for Canadian businesses. But for that to happen, a lot of things must change. At present, Canada's public procurement is following outdated rules of that old free trade order that no longer exists. For years, we've been buying as a government significantly from foreign suppliers for short-term gain. Now we need to use government procurement using Canadian taxpayer dollars to spur Canadian businesses for longer-term prosperity. To support Canadian industries, the government's introducing a new comprehensive Buy Canadian policy that will move from best efforts to buy Canadian to a clear obligation to do so. And when Canadian suppliers are truly unavailable, will require local consent and purchases from trusted partners. And these cases will be the exception.
Trump continues to defend his global tariff regime, even preparing to take his case before the Supreme Court, declaring that without the tariffs, this country is in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Canadian officials maintain there's been no capitulation, zero, never regarding their position on trade negotiations. Despite ending counter tariffs on U.S. goods under CUSMA, the psychological impact of Canada's response extends far beyond economics. Marty Warren, United Steelworkers National Director for Canada, called Trump's tariffs a direct attack on Canadian industries and workers, saying thousands of Canadian jobs are on the line and communities that rely on steel and aluminum are being put at risk. Many Canadians are boycotting U.S. products and calling on the government to reduce the country's economic dependence on the U.S. The environmental implications are equally significant. Carney's decision to pause the EV mandate represents another major reversal of Justin Trudeau's marquee environmental policies. One of Carney's first acts as Prime Minister was to abolish the consumer price on carbon. Now he's suspending the electric vehicle targets that were supposed to reach 100% zero-emission vehicle sales by 2035. Environmental groups are furious. Keith Stewart, senior energy strategist with Greenpeace Canada, asked what was the point of electing Mark Carney when we get Pierre Poilievre's climate policy. He argued that Canada should be aligning with Europe, which is doubling down on renewable energy and electric vehicles, rather than bowing before Trump's attack on environmental protection. The timing couldn't be worse for Trump's broader trade strategy. JP Morgan economists raised their recession forecast to a 40% probability in 2025, up from 30% at the start of the year. The uncertainty created by Trump's constantly shifting tariff policies is holding back massive amounts of investment, exactly as Carney warned. Financial markets have been in turmoil, with the S&P 500 losing nearly 1% after Trump's trade war escalations. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has lost more than 8% of its value in the past month as the president repeatedly shifted his tariff plans. What makes this particularly ironic is that Trump's tariffs are supposed to protect American workers and industries. Instead, they're forcing America's closest ally and largest trading partner to actively work against American economic interests. Canada and the U.S. are massive trading partners. U.S. imports from Canada totaled $412.7 billion in 2024, while U.S. exports to Canada were worth $349.4 billion. The European Union has also announced retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods, adding further pressure on American exporters. Australia's Minister for Trade and Tourism called Trump's doubled charges unjustified and not the act of a friend. The global response is creating exactly the kind of economic isolation that trade wars are supposed to prevent. Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs are particularly self-defeating because the United States is a net importer of these materials from Canada. Morgan Stanley analysts warned that the tariffs would lead to higher domestic prices, essentially taxing American manufacturers and consumers to protect a smaller domestic industry. The automotive sector integration across North America means that Trump's auto tariffs could essentially permanently shut down the automobile manufacturing business in Canada, as Trump himself warned. But that would also devastate American auto manufacturers who depend on Canadian parts and assembly. The strategic implications extend far beyond trade. Canada's pivot away from the United States is exactly what China and other rivals want to see. By forcing America's closest ally to diversify away from U.S. economic dependence, Trump is weakening American influence in North America and creating opportunities for competitors to gain market share. Carney's announcement that Canada will focus on domestic economic transformation and move from reliance to resilience is a direct rebuke of the integrated North American economy that has been a cornerstone of American economic power. The fusion between the Canadian and U.S. economies, which Carney said has gone from being a strength to a vulnerability, is being deliberately unwound because of Trump's trade aggression. What's most telling is Carney's description of the current situation as not a transition, it's a rupture. This isn't a temporary trade dispute that will be resolved with negotiations. It's a fundamental restructuring of the North American economic relationship. The unemployment effects are already visible. Statistics Canada revealed the unemployment rate is at the highest level since 2016, outside of the early pandemic. This is forcing the Canadian government to extend employment insurance programs and create new training programs for displaced workers. The long-term damage to American-Canadian relations may be irreversible. Trump's repeated threats to annex Canada, combined with his trade aggression, have created deep resentment among Canadian leaders and citizens. Ontario Premier Doug Ford's threat to cut off electricity supplies to the United States shows how far the relationship has deteriorated. The irony is that Trump's tariffs are achieving the opposite of their stated goals. Instead of bringing manufacturing back to America, they're pushing Canada to build domestic alternatives to American suppliers. Instead of strengthening American economic dominance, they're encouraging allies to reduce their dependence on the U.S. economy. Instead of creating American jobs, they're destroying integrated supply chains that employ workers on both sides of the border. Canada's response shows how quickly Trump's America First policies can backfire when applied to closely integrated economies. The $5 billion emergency fund, the Buy Canadian policy, and the suspension of environmental targets are all direct responses to Trump's economic aggression. They represent a fundamental shift in how America's closest ally views its relationship with the United States. The global implications are staggering if Trump's trade policies can force Canada, America's most integrated economic partner, to actively work against American economic interests. What does that say about U.S. relationships with other allies? The European Union, Japan, South Korea, and other partners are watching Canada's response and drawing their own conclusions about the reliability of economic partnerships with Trump's America. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how other countries are responding to Trump's trade wars, check out our other videos. And if you want to stay updated on how Trump's economic policies are reshaping global trade relationships, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analyses and breaking news.